Hi everyone, it's Lisa. Thank you so much for joining me today. In today's video, I'm going to be working with the Mason Jar Fold It die set from the Stamps of Life. This die set will make a card shaped like a mason jar. And this die set will also be available on HSN at the time that this video posts. So if you are watching this video at the time it posts, check the links below and you'll see the link for the HSN website where you can purchase this jar. So the die set comes with this large mason jar die. You have the shadow layer, which also makes the actual card base, and then you have the top layering piece. It also has the lid for the jar with the shadow. There's also a label for the jar, and you can put that right on the center of the jar if you wish. And there's also a heart with a die that says love inside of it. There's also another heart, which is a shadow with a solid heart. And then you also have this round die, which can be used for gumballs in your mason jar if you wanted to. Now I just want to show you the difference between the actual jar to stamp die set from the Stamps of Life and this new die set. You can see the difference in size. It is quite a difference. The large die actually ends up being 5.5 inches by 4.5 inches, and then the smaller die is roughly 3.5 by 2 inches. There is a stamp set that goes with this jar die, and it looks like this that's on your screen. It has some sentiments that can fit inside the label, which says thinking of you, thank you, happy anniversary, happy birthday, just for you. Now I'm not sure if it comes packaged with the jar or if it's a separate purchase, but I will link all of that information down below. So I'm going to be making 2 cards with this mason jar die set. My first card, which is here on the screen, is going to be a shaker card. So I start out by die cutting the top layering die with some white cardstock, and I'm inking up the edges with some Stamps of Life Sky ink just to add some dimension to the edges so it doesn't look so flat. I also die cut the shadow layer out of that lemon pattern paper, and that is from the Friend collection from the Stamps of Life. So to make this a shaker card, I actually have to take my craft knife and I have to cut away the inside. So on that white cardstock layer, you'll see, if you have it in front of you, you'll see that there are like some embossed lines just around the edges of it, and I'm just basically tracing those embossed lines. They're just a little bit of raised lines on that die cut piece, so it helps me just know where to trim this. So I'm just following those lines and then just trimming away the center. And then I'm just going to set those pieces aside, and I'm going to move on to stamping out my lemons. And these are from the Lemonade to Drink stamp set from the Stamps of Life. I'm just stamping them on some Bristol Smooth cardstock with my Forever Black Stamps of Life ink. And then I'm going to use my Zig Clean Color Real Brush pens to do some watercoloring. So I start out with my darkest color and lay that down first, and the dark color that I'm using is the yellow, and then I'm going to bring in the blender and I'm just going to blend that out into the rest of the white area. And I'm also going to be using the same colors there for the sides of that oval shape of the lemon. So I have the yellow, which I laid down, and then I'm bringing the blender just to blend that towards the middle, and that just gives it a lightened color in the center of that lemon. And then for the inside, I'm just coming in with my lemon yellow color and then my blender to blend that out. So only 3 markers I'm using. For my darks, it's the yellow, and then for the light, it's the lemon yellow and also the blender. And I'm going to color all of these up the same way. Next, I cut a piece of acetate. I actually used that top layering die for the mason jar, and I ran that through my die cut machine with the acetate to cut out the mason jar shape. And now I'm just adding some glue behind the white mason jar die cut piece and adding that directly to the top of the acetate that I cut out. Next, I took some double-sided adhesive foam and I turned that mason jar piece over so that the back side is exposed, and I just trimmed down some double-sided foam so that I can layer that up on the back side of this jar. So the sides of that mason jar has very thin pieces of foam, because the sides are so thin, and then the bottom part, the foam is thicker as well as the top part. So I'm just cutting the foam so that I can fit it all along this mason jar, and make sure when you do this that you don't leave any gaps between your foam pieces, because you don't want your shaker pieces to fall through the open spaces of your foam. So close it up tightly. Next, I'm going to take my large shadow die and I'm going to sprinkle some sequins in there, and I'm also going to add my lemons. So I just went through my stash and just found some sequins mix and shaker pieces that I want to use. And now I'm just making sure that my foam is high enough that the shaker pieces are going to be able to move around inside that mason jar. Next, I'm going to peel back the adhesive backing off of all of the foam. And I'm also going to add some glue to that foam just for an extra layer of security. It is sticky, but I just want to make sure that it stays adhered just by adding that extra layer of glue. So now I'm going to go ahead and add that top piece directly to the shadow layer. I die cut the lid out of some of the strawberry cardstock from the Stamps of Life, and I'm just inking up the edges with some strawberry ink. And I'm going to go ahead and add that lid to the top of the jar. So I stamped and die cut one of the labels, and I thought about adding it to the center, but I didn't like how it was so large and took away from all of those pretty pieces that are inside that mason jar. So what I did instead is I took this word die, Take It Easy. It is from one of the Stamps of Life card kits, and I die cut it out of some black cardstock, and I'm just going to add it directly to the top of the acetate on this jar. Next, I'm going to take a piece of twine from my stash, and I'm just going to wrap it around the top of the lid, and I'm going to adhere it to the back of that mason jar with some double-sided adhesive tape. And then I took the same twine and tied it in a bow, and I'm just adding it to the top of that jar with some hot glue. Now I'm going to make my card base, so I'm taking a piece of white cardstock, folding it in half, and I'm going to take that large shadow die, and I'm going to place the left edge of the die just so that it slightly extends past the fold in the cardstock, and then I'll run that through my die cut machine, and it gives me the jar shape as my card base. It did cut off the side of the jar, which is okay, because I'm going to add this top piece that I decorated right to the top of that card base, and it's going to hide that straight edge and you'll never be able to see it. So I'm just going to add some glue there and just add the mason jar top to the card base and press that down really well, and that completes my mason jar shaped shaker card. For my next card, I am going to be making another mason jar shaped card, only this time it's not going to be a shaker, it's just going to be a regular card, and I decided to use the Candy to Share stamp set and fill this jar with candy, and just by stamping. So I die cut the mason jar die, the actual top layering die, with some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth cardstock. And the reason I die cut it with that particular cardstock is because I knew I wanted to color with alcohol markers, and that's the cardstock I use for alcohol marker coloring. But before I get to the alcohol markers, I am stamping up the outlines of the candy stamps with my Memento Tuxedo black ink, which is what I use when I color with alcohol markers. And then for the gumdrops, I'm just using some of the Stamps of Life inks in various colors. So I have Blue Jay is the blue, Candy is the pink, and then Pixie is the purple. So I'm just putting these stamps here in just a random pattern, no particular order, just placing them randomly throughout this mason jar, making sure that I clean off the gumdrop stamps before I stamp it with a different color. There is a stamp in this stamp set that has a pattern for those gumdrops. They're just little dots, and what I do is I go in with a darker color. So it's the same pink color here, only it's a guava, which is a darker pink. And I just stamp out those dots, so you have the lighter pink ink underneath, which is the candy, and then the darker ink on the top, which is the guava. And for the blue ones, again, the sky ink is underneath, and then I'm using the blueberry ink for the dots. And then for the purple ones, I have the Pixie, which is the lighter ink underneath, and then the grape ink is my darker ink for the pattern on the top. So here's where I'm going to come in with my Copic markers and just color the rest of these candies up. So with the yellows, I'm using the Y15 as the dark and then Y13 as the light. I also have some oranges, which is the YR12 and YR14. R18, my pink is R83, and R85 for the dark. And for the wrappers of each of the candy pieces, I'm using my C markers. So the dark is the C4, which I just go over the outline where the shadow is in each one of those stamp sets with that dark color. And then I just go over the rest of it with my light C color, which is the C1. And I do that for all of them. Now for these mints, I have this stamp which puts a little bit of a design on the candy pieces. So for the orange ones, I stamp out that design with some tangerine ink, and with the pink peppermint, I stamp out with the guava ink. And then I'm just going to go over the edge of that mason jar with some sky ink just to add a little bit of shadow to that mason jar. I die cut the lid from this orange striped paper that is from the XOXO paper pad, and I inked up the edges with tangerine ink. I die cut the shadow for the mason jar out of guava cardstock, and I'm going to adhere this top part of the mason jar that I decorated onto the guava cardstock. Next, I'm going to add some dimensional foam to the back side of the lid, just so that it looks like it's raised up onto that card. I also used the stamps, and I stamped out "Just for You" and the stamp for the actual label, and then I stamped that onto some guava cardstock, and I'm going to put a label over this jar. I do put some foam to raise that up, and then I wrap some pink twine around the top of the jar and tie it in a bow, and then I'll just snip off the ends. Next, I'm going to create the card base. So I take a piece of guava cardstock and fold it in half, use my bone folder to press it down in the middle, and then I'm going to take the jar die. This time it's going to open from the top. So I'm going to put the die slightly above the fold in the cardstock and run it through my die cut machine, and then add some glue, and then add that jar that I decorated onto the top of the card base. And then I'll just add a few silver gems to the label, one on each side of the sentiment, and that will complete this card. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe for more card making tutorials. Thanks for watching and have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.